Third is Suarez. Goodell comes running in. He's under it, makes the catch. Here's the throw to the plate. It's in the air. He is out! Cameron Rick hangs on! Oh, man, what a play! Deep to right field. Way up there, and way second
And welcome back to the Stupid Money Podcast. We have the wild card rounds prediction show today, the preview, everything that we looked up, everything we want to talk about. The opponent, I guess, is a surprise because when we spoke towards the middle of last week, we were pretty sure it was going to be the Diamondbacks. That is not the case. The Diamondbacks finished the regular season about as ice cold as possible, but luckily for them, so did the Cubs and Reds. So they lucked into the third wild card spot. But the Phillies will face none other than womp, 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 the Marlins. What are your thoughts on the Marlins? Maybe not totally seizing this opportunity, but taking advantage of the fact that everyone else sucked in the last week of the season.
Yeah, I think they definitely benefited from their schedule. If they didn't play the Pirates the last 3 games, not to say the Pirates punted because obviously they weren't like an elite team, but I think it might have lined up that they would have had like half decent starters pitching, but they kind of just said we want to get the young guys one more start. So they threw Quinn Priester as a 7.5 ERA. I don't think they were looking to see what we have next year instead of putting their best foot forward for the last 10 games, which I don't really blame them. That's what rebuilding franchises should do, especially when, 10 games under for the Pirates is ahead of schedule, I think. So the Marlins benefited from that, whereas the Brewers still threw some decent arms against the Cubs, and the Astros were in a division race. So the Diamondbacks got their best. They got Verlander, they got Javier, and they got JP France. So, I think a lot of it just came down to the schedules, which the Marlins did what they had to do. They're banged up, so I think it definitely could have gone differently, but it is what it is. And, they're banged up coming into Philly, so hopefully that stays that way. I don't know if Arias is going to play or not, but yeah.
Yeah, so series starts tomorrow, which when this comes out, it'll actually be Tuesday morning. So it'll be first game day, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, if necessary, best of 3. All games at 8 p.m., which I think greatly benefits the Phillies because an already crazy crowd is going to be extra ruckus, extra drunk, which will be a huge benefit to the Phillies. I'm surprised. So this year, each series was in a certain time slot all 3 days. That was not the case last year. So I found that a little interesting that you pretty much got locked into a time for all 3 days. I don't know, if there's only one game on Thursday, are they going to change that game to 7? I don't know. But it's just interesting that the time slots were all locked in like that. I've not seen that before for a playoff series.
Yeah, it was definitely different than last year, but I'm definitely not complaining about the 8 o'clock slots for us.
Yeah, the Phillies by far got the best draw time-wise out of any of the games, obviously, because I don't know, the AL teams, some of them are starting at noon, I think. Is that the Rays and Rangers? I think they start at noon or 12:30, something like that. That's pretty brutal, especially the Rays don't really draw the way it is. So
I feel like they kind of do that. They just cut their ties, cut their losses with these bad markets, because the Rays and the Guardians were really early last year. They were before us last year, and I remember I had an exam at 2 o'clock, and I was walking to class during the one wild card game.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. So let's dive into this. You mentioned the injuries for the Marlins. They do not have Sandy Alcantara, and they do not have Perez, the rookie phenom who
Mm-hmm.
was on an innings limit and then ended up on the IL at the end here. So it's Jesus Luzardo in game 1 for them, Braxton Garrett in game 2, and then both teams have game 3 as to be determined. If you go by the depth charts, though, it's Edward Cabrera for the Marlins and Ranger Suarez for the Phillies. Obviously, the big thing here is the L next to Luzardo and Garrett's name, or Garnett's names, are lefties, and the Phillies have struggled with lefties. This is kind of the one thing that you don't totally love here is the lefty situation.
Yeah, and looking at like our guys' numbers against them in like these specific pitchers, mostly Luzardo, the matchups aren't great. Schwarber's 2 for 9, Turner's 0 for 8, Harper's 1 for 9 with 5 strikeouts, Bohm's 1 for 11, Castellanos is 2 for 7, and JT's 1 for 13. So like Luzardo, the numbers aren't great. He's having a really good year. He's 17th in the league in WAR. He's at 3.7. He strikes out a lot of guys. His strikeout rate's 10.5 per 9. He walks a decent amount of guys. It's about close to 3 in terms of walks per 9. This year, I know you're going to touch on this in a bit, but he started 2 games against us this year. He went 6 innings in both and gave up at most 3 runs. One of those games he went 6 1/3, 2 runs, 9 strikeouts. He kind of found his groove this year. I think they got him a few years ago in the Starling Marte trade. Down the stretch in September specifically, he has 29 1/3. He has a 3.7 with 33 strikeouts in those 29 innings, 229 batting average against, 321 slug. So he's not really like he's not really hitting barrels, but his pitch mix is interesting. He was always like a pretty highly regarded prospect, and then this year he kind of took off, and that has to do a lot with him kind of tinkering with his mix. He used to throw like a sinker 18% of the time and a 4-seamer 29% of the time, and this year he kind of just scrapped the sinker, and now it's 46% 4-seam fastball and only 4% sinker. But the fastball is his only like plus pitch, and it basically acts as a sinker because it has 14 inches of horizontal run. So like it's still essentially a sinker, and his run value on it was 15 runs, which is like 90th percentile. Like it's an elite fastball. But every other pitch actually has like negative run value, and he's in the 45th percentile in hard hit rate. So he does get hit pretty hard. It just seems like he definitely benefits from his defense because his ERA is a 3.6 and his expected ERA is a 4. So he seems to be benefiting from that for sure. And on top of that, it could be the stadium because his home and road splits are pretty drastic. He had 108 innings at home this year with a 3.7 ERA, and opponents were slashing 216, 285, 369 against him, whereas on the road he had 30 less innings at 70, and his ERA was 4.5, and the slash line was pretty significant. It was 276, 329, 470. So on the road, guys were basically all-star hitters against him.
Yeah, that's a significant difference there. I know we were talking about Garrett is the opposite then, pretty much.
Yeah. Garrett's home and road. He has 80 innings at home with a 4.5. Similar slash line to Luzardo's road splits, 273, 321, 463. But on the road, his ERA drops from 4.5 to 2.8.
Yeah, the size of that ballpark, that is just really, really weird splits for you think about the size of the Marlins Park down there, Lone Depot, whatever it's called now. That is a little odd to see. So obviously the Phillies, Citizens Bank Park, significant hitters ballpark. So we'll see if that has anything to do with it. But definitely odd splits from him for sure.
Yeah. And then Cabrera.
Yeah, let's go to that really
I
quick.
think the biggest thing with Cabrera is his home and road splits are pretty drastic too. At home he has 48 innings with a 2.4, and I mean the slash line is basically non-existent. 201 batting average, 284 slug. But on the road he has 51 innings and his ERA is a 5.96.
Yeah.
The batting average is still really low, 227, but the on base jumps to 362. The guy has 5.96 walks per nine. We saw that in a start earlier in the year against him. The Phillies won on July 31st. He went 3 innings, only gave up 2 hits and 2 runs, but he had 6 walks in 3 innings. So, like, I think the bottom line is Garrett's splits are pretty good on the road, but
Yeah.
I think the 8 o'clock game with the crowd, I think that these pitchers will get rattled. They have pretty high walk rates, Luzardo and Cabrera especially, and they're young. They haven't really pitched in the playoff game. Luzardo has 3 playoff appearances, and 2 of them were starts in 2020, and neither was particularly good. He went 1-1 in the starts. He didn't make it past. He didn't make it out of the 5th inning. He went 3 1/3 and 4 1/3, and gave up 3 runs and 4 runs in each of them. So he has playoff experience, but it was in Oakland in 2020, so it was a while ago. And
yeah, and there's nobody there.
Philly on the road is a lot different than Oakland at home. So
Right.
I think him and Cabrera will get pretty rattled because they're both kind of power pitchers as opposed to Garrett's finesse maybe traveling a little bit better.
All right, so our guy Nick here is gonna join us for the second half of the show here. I told him, come on, give us some predictions. But before we get to that, we're gonna hop into the Philly starters against the Marlins this season. Wheeler, 3 starts, 18 innings, 15 hits, 4 walks, 17 strikeouts, a 3 ERA flat. Aaron Nola, dude, 3 starts, 16 innings, 24 hits, 0 walks, 18 strikeouts, 5 home runs, a 6.75 ERA. Wheeler, we talked about Wheeler. Wheeler, outside of facing the Nationals, was really good this year. I don't have a lot of concerns with him in game 1, but I kind of want to start with Nola. Like, I don't know how to explain that because that is one of the funniest stat lines ever, to go 18-0 on the strikeout to walk ratio, and your ERA is still almost 7.
Yeah, Nola's just so weird. I have minimal expectations for his start just because it's been such a mixed bag this year. I've kind of already penciled in the Soler and Josh Bell home runs in his game, but yeah. Aside from that, I probably expect at least 5 innings from him. Whether or not he adds on to those 2 home runs, that'll probably dictate how the game goes. But I don't know. It seemed like all these pitchers have had such a better month than the numbers kind of show. But when you look at like our guys in September versus their guys, like Wheeler, like you said, it seems like aside from the national starts, he's been really good. But his ERA in September is 3.7, and Nola's ERA in September is 5.47, and Rangers' ERA in September is a 5.2. So the Marlins starters are definitely a lot hotter than ours going into the playoffs. But I think the benefit on our side is the track record. All 3 of these guys did it last year, and they're kind of used to this stage.
Right.
Yeah, I think with Nola, like we've seen in the past, he's been able to do it in October. He's obviously had this rough year this year. What I'm curious to see is he going to be able to do what he did last year?
Right.
Because, I mean, it is a totally different environment down there in October. You're feeding off the crowd. You have a Miami team that, again, isn't really used to this type of environment, whereas Nola is. Nola's going to have the support of the crowd. And if Nola does get blown up, I do think this is one of, not to get ahead of ourselves here, but this is one of the deeper bullpens in the league. And so if he does get blown up and if the game's still relatively close, you could also justify putting in Ranger there as a piggyback, assuming you wouldn't need him for a game 3 there. if the game was close enough that you could potentially sweep them. So the Nola thing's concerning, but I think in a 3-game series with the pitching depth, it can be canceled out to an extent.
Yeah, let's go to game 3 here, because you bring up a pretty good point there, actually. If the Phillies lose game 1, is Ranger piggybacking Nola here, and then it's a figure it out, like Chris Sanchez goes 2 innings in game 3, and then like Strahm goes 2 innings, and then it's 5 innings of Hoffman, Alvarado, Dominguez, Soto, Kimbrel. Is that a situation we could see happening here, do you guys think?
I think that's why it's still TBD. I think I saw last week after they clinched, then they kind of hinted at how the rotation would go. They said that game 3 was Ranger, but they were leaving it as TBD in case they had to use him out of the bullpen. So I think I heard this I swear I heard it on the broadcast yesterday, maybe on the radio. They said that the Phillies bullpen was the least. It was like the least innings thrown in the league out of a bullpen. And I think that's kind of where the WAR numbers from our starters get skewed, because Nola was not great this year, but he just eats up so many innings and he never really misses a start. So as much as we kind of saw the bullpen tire out a bit in August, I think they are pretty well rested, and Sir Anthony's starting to look better. And Thompson did say today that Kerkering probably will be a high leverage guy. So they have another high leverage righty back there. So I do think that they'll definitely consider using Ranger out of the bullpen, especially because Soto's looked better. So you kind of have another lefty that you trust to go with Strahm and Alvarado. So I think they'll definitely be more open to using him in games 1 or 2.
And I think pitching is going to be a huge advantage here for the Phillies, because the Marlins just clinched on Saturday, and they've been using their bullpen a lot down the stretch here. They don't have Alcantara, which would have been huge for them to have him in game 1. He's been injured. Yeah. So having all the depth that we're going to have, that they're really not going to have. They're going to have it to an extent, but they've really been taxing their bullpen down the stretch just to get into this position. So, again, there's going to be a lot of flexibility. And I think it's impressive on Ranger's part that we're even having this conversation. We're having the conversation that, hey, Ranger could come in out of the bullpen. He could start. And Ranger's a high-quality pitcher. There's not a lot of high-quality pitchers that you can say that about, where you're like, oh, well, he can start. He can come out of the bullpen. He is just – we've seen it throughout his career. He can come in any position, and he is just composed, and he just has that ability to come in any situation. And that's going to be huge for the Phillies in this series.
Yeah, the health thing, we touched on this in the open. The health thing is so big, because not only are the Marlins down a couple key arms for this series, but the other guys had to pick up the slack during the regular season while those guys were out. So putting kind of, more miles on those arms too. So it's kind of a double-edged sword for the Marlins there that gives the Phillies an advantage. Let's kind of look at the hitters from this season. A lot of funny numbers here. Harper, I think he missed the first series, right? I think he only missed one.
I think just the one in April.
Yeah, so pretty good numbers from him. Schwarber, that's a Schwarber stat line. That is what it is. Turner, I think I'd like to see those numbers after the ovation, I guess. I should have maybe pulled that up. Castellanos, huge against them this year. Bohm, big against them. Marsh, who I want to talk about Marsh, because this is the interesting one. Marsh with these 2 lefty starters that the Marlins are going to throw in game 1 and game 2. There's a belief he's not going to play at least one of them. And then you look at these numbers he has against the Marlins on the season, and I don't know, it makes you think. I think Rojas is going to be in there. Weston Wilson looks like he's going to make the roster, actually, maybe over Jake Cave, just because of the amount of lefties the Marlins can throw at the Phillies, both starters and out of the bullpen. I think they have 6 options out of the bullpen that are lefty or something like that. So that's a tough one there. I'd like to hear what you guys think about what they do with Marsh, Rojas, Weston Wilson. I don't know if Pache is going to make this roster. He's kind of been struggling since he came back. There's a lot of options, but I don't know what they do, because I look at Marsh's numbers against the Marlins this year, and I have a hard time keeping him out of the lineup.
I would tend to agree, but then I looked at it. Marsh career off Luzardo's 0 for 4 with 3 strikeouts, and career off Garrett, he's 0 for 2 with a strikeout. So it's really small sample size, but like, while he does have good numbers against the Marlins this year, it's not necessarily these guys. They might save him for the first few innings and then pick their spots with a bullpen guy, because I mean, if you start Weston Wilson and give him like 4 innings, maybe like 1 at bat, and then you put Marsh in, you're burning a bench option for later on in the game. But at the same time, it's like, I'd rather take my chances in the later innings than have to rely on like a Weston Wilson pinch hit if I'm starting Marsh. Right. So I think actually like letting Marsh kind of come off the bench and pick your spots with him, that gives you more flexibility than starting him and taking your chances with the strikeouts against guys that he doesn't really have great numbers against.
I heard today in the Rob Thompson press conference, he was talking about, he mentioned Pache's name at one point of him potentially playing for the defensive aspect, because I feel like with Pache and Rojas and Marsh, Weston Wilson, I mean, Marsh definitely has the better bat compared to all those guys against righties. But when it comes to lefties, it becomes a lot more comparable. And at that point, it's like early in the game, you might as well value defense. And then if they bring in someone in the bullpen later, you can swap them out. And if you're going to value defense early, I feel like Rojas is the best option there. He's been playing Gold Glove caliber defense the entire season. I just feel like it wouldn't be the worst idea to start him. I understand he hasn't been in that situation before, that playoff situation, compared to Marsh, who has. But when you look at Marsh's numbers against lefties versus Rojas's defense, you can always bring in Marsh later in the game. I feel like that might be defense might end up being a deciding factor.
Yeah, so I was telling Alex this. I watched a YouTube video today, and I should have remembered the name, but it was talking about Bryce Harper moving to first base and like the domino effect it's had on the rest of the Phillies. And a big part of it was that Rojas has gotten to play. And I'm pretty sure this was recorded before the Mets series, so the numbers are probably a little different now. But Rojas had been in 57 games, either started or appeared at some point, and the Phillies are 38-19 in those games, actually. I was surprised by how big that number was. Now, like I said, Alex, some of that was he came in late as a defensive replacement when they were already up a few runs. So, but at the same time, I guess you could say he maybe helped save the game in some of those spots. So I mean, think
Rojas,
yeah.
Rojas is a great guy to have in the playoffs because he can steal bases, he can play defense, he can do all the little things that help you win those 1-run games in October, especially against a team that like Miami. They're 31-13 in those 1-run games this season. So you need every advantage you can get in those low-scoring games.
The other thing that I like that they did with Rojas was like when he came up, obviously he's hitting 9th, and you didn't really know what to expect from the bat, and you were mostly just having him in there for defense. And we saw it a bunch when they were trying to manufacture runs. He could not get a bunt down at all, and they kind of just like sat him down in the Mets series and was like, "Hey, you're going to bunt every at bat." So the last 3 games, he kind of just worked on getting bunts down, whether it was for a hit, for a sacrifice, anything like that. So kind of going off what you said, Nick, he's definitely the right guy to have in there in 1-run games, for whether it's defense, speed, and it seems like they're kind of making a concerted effort to get him fundamentally right, because we saw last year that, not to bring it up, but Marsh's inability to get a bunt down in a big spot in the back end of the order kind of killed them. So it seems like they're trying to combat that a little bit, knowing that Rojas is going to be in games late at the back end of the lineup.
Yeah, I will say I think this weekend was really nice for the young guys. Stott, Marsh, Bohm, Rojas. Not so much Rojas, but those other 3 have kind of scuffled towards the end of the season here. And then over the weekend, it seemed like they all kind of got right, got some feel-good energy going into the playoffs, which was nice. But I will say this. I don't understand the whole bunting with Kyle Schwarber up next. I've said this to you guys, I think, but Kyle Schwarber either hits a home run, walks, or strikes out. So I don't understand the point of moving a runner over for him, because he's either going to move the runner over himself by walking, hit a home run, drive him in, or you have 2 outs then if he strikes out. That's just a small thing, but bunting for Schwarber up next has kind of driven me crazy this year. All right, so let's look at the Marlins here this season. Obviously, I saw Luis Ariz is apparently playing. He hasn't played since September 23rd, so a little over a week. It's obviously, there's some timing stuff to that, getting his feet under him again. They got some big numbers, some of these guys, against the Phillies this year. And a large part of this, honestly, is Aaron Nola. De La Cruz, Soler, and Sanchez, I know all have bombs off of him. Josh Bell down there, I know, showed up late to the party getting traded midseason, but 357 with a nearly 1,000 OPS for him. Out of this group, who are we worried about heading into this series? Obviously, Ariz will, be towards the top there.
I feel like the obvious answer here might be Josh Bell, just because of his history against the Phillies. I feel like every time this guy comes to town, he just hits tanks. And so, this is a good lineup, a lot of good pieces, but Josh Bell has just had consistent success in Citizens Bank Park, and I can already see top of the 8th, 2-run home run to take the lead, right? This is just a guy that has killed the Phillies. He's been all over the division. He was in Washington. Now he's in Miami. It's kind of like when Freddie Freeman was in Atlanta, man. There's just some guys that just come into this ballpark and they just love hitting here. And that seems like the obvious answer to me just because of what he's been able to do. But there's a lot of good bats in this lineup, so I'll let Alex take the rest.
My pick Soler solely because I just have the Braves World Series run in my head, and the World Series MVP in this type of lineup where they're not necessarily like superstars, but we're talking about how hostile the environment's going to be and how none of them have ever really experienced anything like it. Well, Soler won World Series MVP by hitting a 3-run tank over the train tracks in Houston. So I lean that guy just because he's been here before and he does have good numbers against us this year and career-wise. Career-wise against the Phillies, he's 256 with a 333 on base and a 496 slugging with 8 home runs in 117 at-bats. So he seems to always hit pretty well against us no matter what team he's on since he's kind of come over from Kansas City. So I lean that guy because of the experience. But, yeah, Josh Bell's definitely a close second, especially he had a decent series with the Padres against us last year.
Really last thing on the Marlins lineup. I feel like we got a little kiss of death today because MLB has been ranking like pitching staffs, players, teams going into the playoffs here, the 12 teams in the playoffs, and they had the Marlins lineup at 12. So I just feel like they're going to give us some bad juju off of doing that. So I'm surprised they actually had that lineup 12 the way they love Ariz. So that was a little surprising. But yeah, there's a lot of pieces here, but MLB not giving them a lot of credit. All right, so finally, this is kind of some stuff I brought up or came up with. Advantages for both teams heading into this series. For the Phillies, obviously, they have the experience of last year, and you have guys like Schwarber, Turner, Harper, who before last year also played significant, and Kimbrel, I guess now, who had significant playoff experience before last year. Obviously, home field, the Phillies. Outside of those last 2 games against the Astros in the World Series, the Phillies were pretty unbeatable at home throughout the playoffs, put up some crazy offensive numbers until they didn't, but still. Nick brought this up. Bullpen is a lot deeper than last year. It just felt like it was Sir Anthony and Robertson. Now I feel like, with Kirkring emerging, with Hoffman here, with Strom looking a lot better lately, with the way Soto pitched on Sunday against the Mets was impressive, with Kimbrel getting some rest, which I think he needed. There's a lot of options here, and that obviously plays in the playoffs, and especially plays when we're looking at a 3-game series, not a 5 or 7. Obviously, the Phillies have the star power in the lineup, and Wheeler and Nola are, were stars. We would like to see more of it with Nola. This was Alex. You brought this up. Health. The Phillies are really healthy outside of pretty much just not having Rhys Hoskins again. Whereas the Marlins, Arise is banged up. We'll see how good he is coming back. They don't have Perez and Alcantara in the rotation, who probably Alcantara in game one. Maybe Perez would have started a game. I feel like they would have used him out of the bullpen where he'd been pretty dangerous, though. And the Phillies at home, 49-32. The Marlins, I mean, look, they're kind of the Phillies last year, sneaking in that last seed. No one expects you to be there. You're just kind of playing with house money. As I mentioned, they have a ton of lefty pitching that could give the Phillies problems. And they hit a lot of home runs, which with Aaron Nola is not the greatest thing that you want to see. And their road record under 500, but still kind of a respectable number at 38-42, especially considering you play the Phillies and the Braves a lot. So I don't know what you guys want to add to that. Any takeaways on kind of what both teams have going for them heading into this series?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there. We're definitely healthier. And if you kind of look at playoff series years past, a lot of it often comes down to which team hits the most homers, which team strikes out the most guys, and who kind of has the stars. And I tend to think that even though our lineup might strike out a little bit more than them, I feel like we have the advantage in all three of those categories.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I definitely think that those are the main advantages, though.
And just touching on the home field thing, I think the home field against a team like Miami is even bigger. I mean, you're talking about a team that this is going to be a really big adjustment for a team like Miami. Like, even for a team like Atlanta, it's difficult. And Atlanta sells out. Miami, down the stretch, they got, quote unquote, a lot of fans. It was 25,000. That's a lot of fans in Miami. All right. This is going to be 44,000 people. They're going to be loud. They're going to be going crazy. The game's at 8 o'clock. That gives the fans like 4 to 5 hours to drink before the game, which makes it's a factor. All right. That gets the fans crazier. Miami's just not used to that. They haven't really played. They've never really played in that environment. Their last series, they clinched on the road in Pittsburgh, another team that struggles with attendance. I think Miami's one of those teams similar to Arizona, and the other team we could have played, Arizona, where that home field is just an even bigger advantage just because they're not used to even half of that.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree with that. All right. So unless you guys have any more info to put out here, I guess we'll go with the predictions. I'm going to start. I'm going to say the Phillies win in 3. I actually think they lose the first game, though, and then come back and win the next 2. I think they might struggle with Luzardo, but I don't think the Marlins have as much pitching depth to get them across the finish line as the Phillies do. David Robertson was kind of their key pitching acquisition at the deadline, and he's been really bad, and the Phillies own him. I'd be surprised if they put him in a big spot against the Phillies. So I think the Phillies have that going for them. I think it's going to be a little nervous, but I think the experience and the depth is going to be the difference here.
I'm going to go kind of the same thing. I think they win in 3, but I'm going to flip. I think they win game 1. I think they lose game 2. Close. I don't think Noah fully blows up, but I think they struggle. I think it's more so they struggle with Garrett. I just think that, like I kind of said earlier, I think that the crowd and the moment could kind of get to Luzardo a bit more than Garrett. I think Garrett's stuff plays a little bit better, and the home and road splits for him definitely scare me a bit. And I think that that's kind of the game where they just unload the lefties and they kind of just lefty us to death, whether it's Puck. Tanner Scott's been really good for them in the back end. And then I think they win game 3. Cabrera is just so wild, and I think game 2 is going to be a bit of a dogfight. So they use a lot of their bullpen there, and I think our depth kind of overtakes them in game 3, and that's kind of how I see it all going down. I think our offense just overwhelms them in game 3.
Yeah, I'm going with Alex there. I'm saying Phillies in 3, but they lose game 2. I think the one thing, like the Phillies, I think Wheeler in game 1 he's going to deal. they're going to be back in that environment that they're used to last year. I think that momentum is really going to help them. Game 2, I just don't trust Nola. I think they come out in Game 3. The one thing that scares me with the Marlins, this is a team that's had the Phillies number since the Kapler era, 2018, 2019. They didn't end the Phillies playoff hopes, but a lot of people went back and looked at their record against the Marlins those years and said, hey, if you'd won a couple more games, you'd be in the playoffs right now. So this is a team that historically has played the Phillies very tough, very well, won the season series this year. So as much as I would like to say they're going to sweep, I just don't see that happening. But I think Phillies come out and win the series in 3.
Yeah, it's funny how you guys each picked them to lose Game 2, the game we're all going to be at. So that's going to be hell. Man, that'll be rough. But yeah, so we'll see how this goes. Divisional round starts right up Saturday. So if the Phillies do advance, we'll try to get something out here Thursday or Friday to talk about it. I guess if they lose, maybe we'll take a couple more days to let it sit, get over it. But that's going to do it for this one. And we'll see you, good or bad, on the other side of this series.